Hello everyone, in this lesson I want to give you a quick rundown on some essential elements that every map has to have. I'm going to give you these map elements in no particular order. You can just use this list in order to make sure that all of these are present on your map or otherwise communicated to your map users. The first thing that the map needs to have is a border or neat line. This is also sometimes called a map frame. This is very important to make sure that you are crisping off the edges of your map. Oftentimes, if you don't have a border around your entire page, the map looks unfinished. The map looks incomplete. The inclusion of a border, even if it's a very simple border, around the map is very important to crisp it off and to finalize the map. Whenever I'm doing cartography, actually the very first thing that I do is put in a border or this map frame. When you're producing a map, it's very important to think about the margins around the map. I have had situations where people have printed their map and they have not paid attention to how close they've gotten to the edge of the page, and so the printer that they've printed their map out on is cutting off chunks of their map, whether it's their title or their legend or some other essential map element. And actually I've had students come up to me and say that my title has been cut off, you can't read my legend, is that okay? And of course that's not okay. So it's very important that when you're producing a map that you understand the printer margins that you are going to be printing your map off on. So what I do whenever I'm creating a map is I find out exactly what the printer margins are for the printer that I'm going to be using to print the map, and then I put in a border for my map, this frame around the map. Very first thing, I put it down at the bottom layer so I know that everything that I draw inside of that frame is going to show up on the map when I print it. Now you want to make sure that you give yourself plenty of room. Many printers will have a print margin of 1/4 of an inch. Then you probably want to come in another 1/4 of an inch and have a 1/2 an inch all the way around your map before you put this frame in. That's very important. It doesn't look, some maps can go full bleed. If you have a map that goes all the way to the edge of a sheet of paper, that's called a full bleed map. But they can be very expensive to print. Most maps are going to have a margin around them, particularly maps that you're going to be printing off on most home printers or office printers. So make sure that there's a comfortable margin around the map. Crisp the map off with a neat line or border, draw everything inside that neat line, and then you'll ensure that everything will be printed. It's also the case that maps with a comfortable margin look better, and they look more professional, and they make the cartographer who designed it look more confident in his or her work than if everything is smashed all the way to the end of a page. Next up is a north arrow. All maps have to have a north arrow that shows orientation. Historically, these have been pretty complicated when you're talking about doing a compass rose or something like that from a few hundred years ago. But in most cases today, a very simple north arrow that's unassuming, that's out of the way, will help orient your user so they know exactly what direction north is. Ordinarily, north is at the top of the map. That sort of cartographic convention that we put north at the top of the map. But that does not have to be the case. There may be some circumstances where you're deliberately not putting north at the top of the map. But unless you have a very good reason to do otherwise, you should follow cartographic convention and have north put at the top of the map. I'll say north arrow or graticule. The typical cartographic convention right now is that if you're using a graticule, that means that you are showing the lines of latitude and longitude on your map, then you don't need to also put a north arrow on the map. If you've got the lines of latitude and longitude on there, then as you're going north or south, of course you're labeling the lines of latitude and longitude, and so it should be obvious in what direction north is because you just follow the lines of latitude and lines of latitude. So you need to have a north arrow or a graticule in order to orient your map as far as the direction goes. The third thing that a map has to have is a scale. We spent a lot of time talking about scale, and we looked at 3 ways to communicate scale. It's therefore your responsibility as the cartographer to A, ensure that the map has a scale, B, that the scale is accurate. Remember, scales are accurate along standard parallels, so the standard parallels have to be shown on your map. And C, make sure that the method used to communicate the scale is appropriate for the situation that you are using your map for, the purpose that the map was created, and for the audience that's going to be using your map. So it's absolutely not the case that you can just go up in a software package and say insert scale and use the default of whatever it is that shows up. That will almost never, and I might as well go ahead and say never, give you the best scale for your map. You can always tell when somebody has just chosen default options. Be very deliberate about the options that you choose, and you will make a much better map. The fourth thing is a legend. Every map must have a legend that explains all of the symbols that are used on the map. You want the legend to be able to very clearly communicate this information. It's often the case that when people are using shapefiles in ArcGIS, that shapefiles may have some pretty cryptic names. Often they have different codes for their names, which have something to do with what kind of data is in them. And if you know all of the different codes and the metadata, then you will be able to know what is represented on the map, but most people are not going to have that. Why would you want your user to have to look up something complex? So you want to make sure that all of the entries into your legend are clearly labeled. All of the symbols on the legend correspond to what is on the map. I see that problem frequently as well. You have to make sure that the legend actually has the symbols that are on the map, and you don't want the legend to have more symbols than are on the map either. If the symbol does not appear on the map, then it should not appear on the legend. Again, the purpose here is to effectively communicate information to your user, so make sure that when you design a legend and place it on your map, that it does just that. The fifth thing a map has to have is a title. It needs to have a title, and the title does not need to have the word map in it. Do not put the word map in your title. Sometimes people will say, sometimes people will title a map something like Population of the United States Map, or Oil Exports Around the World Map. Don't do that. Everybody can tell that they're looking at a map. So just remove the word map. Population of the United States. That's a good title. Oil Exports Around the World. That's a good title. Just go ahead and drop the word map. The title for the map needs to be informative. It needs to be prominent on the map. When you look at a map, you want the title to jump out at you. You want that to be larger than other text on the map. You want people to immediately see the text and understand what it is that they're looking at. So feature the title prominently in your map layout. The sixth item you have to have is projection information. You must report what projection your map is in, and it must include a report of what the central meridian is, as well as what the standard parallels are. So you have to make sure that you've gotten those right, and then report them accurately on the map as well. You must also communicate this information clearly as well. Oftentimes, especially in some software packages, they will begin to abbreviate things, use strange abbreviations that are software package specific. Sometimes you see underscores instead of spaces. Remove all of that. Just type the name out so that it's clearly read. Don't make somebody interpret some kind of code or some kind of abbreviation that's software specific. Don't do that. Also, when you're reporting the central meridians and the standard parallels, you need to do this in degrees, minutes, seconds format, and make sure that you include the labels for north, south, east, or west as appropriate. Don't use decimal degree notation, especially reverse decimal degree notation. You want to make sure that you communicate latitude first and then longitude in degrees, minutes, seconds format. The seventh thing you have to have is the name of the cartographer. Put your name on it. Or, in the event that you happen to be working for an agency, you could probably put the name of the agency that was responsible for the production of the map, or the division within an agency. But you do need to make sure that your name is present on the map. I can't tell you how many times I get a map turned in that does not have a name on it. Make sure that when you're creating your map, you put your name on it, because we want to give you credit where credit is due. Number 8, you must include the source of all of your data. If you put data in your map, if you're creating a thematic map, like a choropleth map, the source of your data must be reported. Where did you get that data? Who created it? So that people can track that data down and verify what you are showing. You also need to include the date of the data. If it's U.S. Census data, okay, which U.S. Census is it? Make sure that you are reporting the source of the data as well as the date of all of the data. Number 9, you also need to report the date that the map was produced. It's certainly possible that the date the map is produced, it can be different from the date of the data. I can certainly create a map today that is about data from 10 years ago or more. So you need to make sure that you're reporting both the date the map is produced as well as the date of the data. Remember to think about your layout here. Obviously, the most important thing about your map is actually your display frame, what it is you're actually mapping, so make sure that's large. Make sure that fills space. I also get many maps in that have very poor use of space. Whatever they're trying to map will actually be very tiny. I have seen people with 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper that they were creating a map on of the United States, and the United States will be crammed down in the corner in less than 25% of the page. Go ahead and use the page. You should use the page when you're constructing your layout. That also means that you need to think about what is most important and what is least important as far as text. I already said the title should be very large and draw your attention, but think about some of this other information, projection information, your name, the date of the data, the source of the data, the date the map was produced. That is essential information to have on the map, but it's probably not something you have to have in gigantic text. That should be in much smaller text, sort of as credits, often toward the bottom of the map. You want to establish a visual hierarchy here about what is most important and what is least important on the map, even though all of these elements are required. You want someone to be able to look at your map, see the title so they understand what it's about. Take a look at the map itself, the display frame that you're showing, and then they need to be able to see the legend so they can interpret the map. Those are big key items. The north arrow is something less important. It can be more discrete. All of the credit information, also much more discrete. I've had people turn in maps where their name is as large or even sometimes larger than the title of the map. That doesn't work. Your name is something that's a credit, whereas the title should be much larger. So whenever you're creating your maps, you should be sure to include all of this information and communicate it to your map user.